Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Williams. I have the great honor and pleasure of being president of the Claremont Institute. Let me welcome you again first, and on behalf of our board of directors, extend my warm thanks for your attendance tonight and your support of our work. Before I turn it over to our keynote speaker, Senator Cotton, who Charles Kessler will introduce in a moment, I wanted to just spend a bit of time talking about our plans for the coming year, the impacts the Claremont Institute is having, and just say a few things about our current political moment. But before I do that, I'd like to thank by name our board members in attendance tonight. Please pause for, hold off applause until the end. Bob Curry, Roy Crummer, John Eastman, Ed Erler, Joel Farkas, Brian Kennedy, Charles Kessler, Larry Mattson, and Bob Nelson. None of our work would be possible without our very committed and generous board, and for that I'm very grateful. So our long-running fellowship programs are at the heart of our educational project. You've seen pictures on the slideshow tonight of many of our recent fellowships, and those fellowships would not be possible without generous fellowship sponsors like Robert and Ruth Green and Rich and Jackie Lombardi, who are with us tonight. So please join me in thanking them. We also have about 20 fellowship alumni here tonight. They're our mission on the march, so to speak. We're grateful to them for joining us and for all their work they do to save America. Thank you. I'd also like to recognize some current, former, and aspiring public servants from here in California joining us. This is an illustrious list, so please hold off with your applause till the end. Mike Antonovich, former Los Angeles County Supervisor. Council Member Becky Shevlin from Monrovia. Kit Bobko, former Mayor of Hermosa Beach. CJ Ray, a candidate for the Huntington Beach City Council. Kristen Gaspar, San Diego County Supervisor and a candidate for Congress in my old district down in San Diego. Don Barnes, Orange County Undersheriff and candidate for Sheriff of Orange County. Stephen Bailey, former Superior Court Judge and candidate for California Attorney General. Randall Avila, Executive Director of the Orange County GOP. And last but certainly not least, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, a great American. Thanks for letting us come to visit your district, Congressman. It's beautiful. I also would be remiss if I didn't recognize a few special friends here with us tonight. Sally Schramm of the Ashbrook Center at Ashland University and the wife of our first and dearly departed president, Peter Schramm. Pete Peterson. Pete Peterson is the dean of the School of Public Policy at Pepperdine and one of the bright lights in otherwise dim academia. And he's here with his wife, Gina. Pete. And finally, think tank work out here on the left coast can be lonely sometimes. But luckily, we have Sally Pipes here with us tonight, president of the Pacific Research Institute. We're lucky to have her as an ally, and she's married to our own Charles Kessler. She's the better half, of course. Yeah. Now let me say just a few words about Claremont's work and our purpose before we get to our main event. But first, just one last thank you. Events like these are always made easy for executives and for staff. But behind the scenes, the reason they're easy is because of the tireless efforts of Claremont Institute staff. I wanted to single out especially our Vice President of Development, Christine Dominich, and our events manager, Kirsten Gadio. Thank you to you both. They run around like mad and make us look good, and we get to take all the credit, so thanks. Here at Claremont, we're not your normal policy think tank. We've always devoted ourselves really to the battle of ideas, and especially to educating and writing at the center of the great debates about the meaning of America. The policy battles are important, of course, but they're not the most fundamental thing. Any enduring change in policy, we think, is preceded by a change in ideas. So let me put that claim in the context of our current political crisis. We have now for many years been in the middle of a great national debate about what kind of government and people we should have. And we're at a turning point, I think. We have been for at least a few decades. So what is at stake? Our work at Claremont, as John mentioned at the beginning of the night, is to recover the principles of the American founding, the principles of justice of a free people and society, the equal protection of equal individual rights. That's at the heart of what we do. It's at the heart of the vision of justice at the founding. From this, we get government by consent of we the people. It also means that as a people, we have a certain capacity, we have the right, and it's legitimate to maintain and defend our sovereignty and to decide the future character of our citizenry. There's an alternative and competing vision of justice, with a long history stretching from the progressive movement 100 years ago or so, all the way to today's social justice warriors and safe spaces. This is a vision of group rights, not individual rights, rights that are not a permanent part of human nature, but instead always changing. And this different view, of course, requires a very different system of government, not a limited government tethered to the people, but unlimited government, run by supposedly expert bureaucrats and always changing and expanding with the latest fad or trend to come out of the latest sociology department. I think if we're going to prevail in this crisis, we need to restore the principles of the American founding, and we first have to understand these two visions, and we have to teach the choice between them, because they result in very different outcomes. And the high stakes of this great choice are what we litigate about, what we write about, what we teach about at the Claremont Institute. We write about the many cultural, political, and intellectual parts of this great conflict in our Claremont Review of Books, the goal of which Charles Kessler laid out almost 20 years ago. It was the recovery of a distinctively American conservatism. We might even call it simply, in this day and age, Americanism, rightly understood. We apply this understanding to litigation and Supreme Court briefs to help judges recognize the stakes in constitutional cases, and we teach this to policymakers, government staffers, journalists, speechwriters, lawyers, young academics, and all manner of young and aspiring thinkers and statesmen in our fellowship programs. And finally, with over 600 alumni now in all of our programs, working across the country, we continue to bring that community together, educate its membership, and help equip them to fight as a kind of coalition to restore constitutionalism. We have about 20 alumni working across the Trump administration at the moment, in addition to, of course, the illustrious Senator Cotton, working in the Senate tirelessly. But one of the more senior members confessed to me recently that the only true friends he could count on for help in Washington were fellow Claremont fellows. So really, we need to modify Truman's joke. You know, his joke was, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. That's still true, but you can get a dog or you can do a Claremont fellowship. So over the coming year and into the future, we'll be expanding and deepening these efforts and our effort to shape this and win this battle of ideas. We're launching a new online publishing venture called The American Mind, along with a podcast. We're expanding our educational programming for current and future leaders. And very importantly, we're attacking the battle of ideas at its source in higher education and especially graduate education. The working title for that, and we could modify it, but we like this one so far, is the Center for the American Idea. The solution, we think, to a corrupt elite is not only discrediting it, it also means building something new and supporting and protecting the brave few who resist the growing intolerance and totalitarianism, frankly, of our current higher education establishment. Thank you. You may think I'm being melodramatic, but in our own backyard in Claremont, just this morning it was reported that Scripps College was having a people of color only pool party. So who thought that segregation would be brought back to America by the left? So I look forward over the coming year very much to keeping you all up to speed on our success on all these fronts. Next year we'll celebrate our 40th anniversary. None of this would be possible without your support. So let me again extend my very warm thanks to all of you and Please give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you. Your friendship, your patriotism, and your support is really what makes our job a joy day in and day out. So now I'll shut up and introduce my colleague, Charles Kessler, a friend, a board member. He'll introduce our honoree tonight, Senator Tom Cotton. Charles, of course, is the editor of the Claremont Review of Books, a distinguished professor of government at Claremont McKenna College, and one of the country's premier thinkers and writers. It was also announced last week, and I'm happy to share it with you if you hadn't heard, that Charles will receive one of the very prestigious Bradley Prizes in May in Washington, D.C. So congratulations, Charles. I commend to you his many essays over the years in our magazine and his very important book, I Am the Change, Barack Obama and the Future of Liberalism. But above all that, Charles is a patriot, a gentleman, and a mentor and friend to a generation of students and Claremont Fellows, all working to make America great again, including me. So please join me in welcoming Charles Kessler.
Thank you, Ryan. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here tonight. Before Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of Great Britain, or even a lowly cabinet member, he was a young man in a hurry, full of spirit, talent, ambition, and virtue. He was keen to make a name for himself. His rise was meteoric, though like a meteor, he occasionally was a falling star. When I first met our speaker and honoree, he was a young man in a hurry. That was summer 1997, more than 2 decades ago, when fresh from Harvard College, he was poised to attend Harvard Law School. By the way, if you don't attend Harvard College, you cannot be a Harvard man. If you attend one of its numerous graduate schools, you are just a man who attended Harvard. That's true, by the way. I didn't make that up. Tom Cotton is a Harvard man, but an unusually percipient and indeed courageous one, who during his summer as a Publius Fellow decided to postpone law school to spend a year studying in Claremont. That's what I call Harvard interruptus. Tom was not in such a hurry, in short, that he would decline a chance to learn from Mike Ullman, who spoke earlier tonight, or Harry Jaffa, or Mark Blitz, and others of us at Claremont Graduate School and Claremont McKenna College. Tom had reservations already, of course, about liberal Harvard and about law school in general, and felt already a deep longing to serve his country by enlisting in those days the Marines, a path we discussed many times, an unusual temptation for a young man on the verge of an alluring and lucrative profession. Military service continued to tug at him during law school, a clerkship with the U.S. Court of Appeals, and private law practice. After 9/11, however, Tom decided to leave the law and join the Army, where he served nearly 5 years as an infantry officer, 2 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, interrupted by his posting with the Old Guard at Arlington National Cemetery. That experience, honoring and protecting the nation's honored dead, was a kind of living Gettysburg Address that will be the subject of Tom's first book, which he is writing now. His publisher will be glad to hear. Tom was born and grew up in Arkansas, which had the good sense to send him to the House of Representatives for a term and to the Senate in 2014. A recent president, you may recall, hailed from Hope, Arkansas. The man from Hope, as Bill Clinton used to call himself. He abandoned Hope to marry Hillary. And the rest, as we say, is her story. The next Democratic president made hope and change, but not Hillary, his hallmarks. Benjamin Franklin, in his famous almanac, once remarked that, quote, "He who lives on hope dies fasting," unquote. Indeed, hope has proved a very unsatisfactory political diet. Hope is no substitute, to say the least, for character and political principle. How welcome, then, that our speaker tonight offers his audience and his country something far more substantial than the empty promises of hope. A life still young, lived honorably, and dedicated to the best traditions of our republic. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce the winner of the 2018 Claremont Institute Statesmanship Award, my friend, Senator Tom Cotton.
Thank you all very much for that incredibly warm welcome to my old teacher and friend, Charles Kessler. Thank you for your kind introduction. After that, I have to say, even I am interested in what I'm going to say tonight. Do not abandon hope yet. It's good to be back with the Claremont Institute. This dinner in honor of our hero, Sir Winston Churchill, is something of an annual reunion for a lot of us. And we're here tonight to show our continued support for the Institute and its work. I know all of you hope to see its work shape the direction of our country, including its alumni rising to high positions of influence in government, media, and business. And when that happens, it's natural to ask one to return for an occasion like this. So tonight, I will simply say, I'm sorry that you're stuck with me instead. As you've heard, 21 years ago this summer, I participated in the Institute's Publius Fellowship Program. That's where I got to know people like Charles and Mike Ullman, Larry Arnn, your vice chairman, and so many others who have remained friends and counselors ever since. as important, I learned a lot about the American political tradition. Not abstract philosophy, not brass-knuckle practical politics, but how the two can come together, as in the American founding and across our history. That's the craft of statesmanship, a subject central to the Institute's mission. Statesmen are not uniquely American, of course, as evidenced by the man that we honor tonight, but wherever and whenever we find them, they grapple with the same fundamental questions about human life. For instance, though it's been 53 years since Winston Churchill died, and the world has changed a lot in that time, we're still facing the same central question to which he dedicated himself. How ought a free people govern themselves? This is the question of self-government by citizens. It's also a question of what we can expect from our statesmen. Churchill liked to say that a key distinction between nations is whether the people own the government or the government owns the people. The former condition, the only tolerable one, of course, is what he called civilization, or society based on the opinions of civilians. And by that he meant that violence gave way to order. Crime, warfare, and tyranny gave way to parliaments, law courts, and stability. A country where one could live in safety, free from coercion and oppression. In this he echoed Alexander Hamilton, who wrote, as Publius, in Federalist I, that the American experiment would show the world whether mankind could be governed by reflection and choice, or instead only by accident and force. The two statesmen echo across the ages because both of our countries aspire to the same standard of civilization where, as Churchill said, a wider and less harassed life is afforded to the masses of the people. Churchill, like any one of us here tonight, ranked the citizen higher than the state. But that raises the question of what exactly is a citizen? It's not a subject or a vassal or a serf. It's a free and equal member of a distinct and particular political community. This is particularly true in our nation of immigrants, where there's no crown to which we pledge loyalty, no ties of kinship that hold us together. Instead, what unites us is a shared way of life toward shared purposes, which finds its most direct expression in the laws that we make for ourselves through our elected representatives. Like Lincoln before him, Churchill located what he called the highest expression of these ideas in the American Declaration of Independence. The statesman needs to understand that the rule of law, made by elected representatives of free and equal citizens, is what sets us apart. And it's reasonable for our citizens to expect this knowledge in our statesmen, and for them to expect the statesmen to put their interests first in the making of those laws. And after the Declaration and the Constitution, is there any more fundamental law than the rules we set for how people can join our shared political community? Our founders understood all this, but I'm sorry to say that too many of our elites in both parties today do not. Immigration was obviously an issue of signal importance in the 2016 election, and it remains so today. That makes sense because immigration is more than just another issue. It touches on fundamental questions of economics, identity, and citizenship. And for too long, a bipartisan, cosmopolitan elite in Washington has dismissed our people's legitimate concerns about these things and tended to put its own interest or the interests of foreigners above our national interest. No one captured this sensibility better than our last president, when he famously called himself a citizen of the world. I would say with that phrase, he revealed a deep misunderstanding of the nature of citizenship. After all, citizen and city share the same Latin root word. Citizenship, by definition, means that you belong to a particular political community. Yet many of our elites share his sensibility. They believe that American citizenship, real, actual citizenship, is meaningless, ought not be foreclosed to anyone, and ought not be the basis for distinctions between citizens and foreigners. You might even say that they think American exceptionalism lies in not making exceptions when it comes to citizenship and foreigners. But this mindset is, shall we say, foreign to most Americans. It's also foreign to the Anglo-American political tradition, as Churchill proclaimed repeatedly in defense of the principles of what he called the English-speaking peoples. Take our Declaration of Independence. Our cosmopolitan elites love to cite those stirring passages about the rights of mankind when they talk about immigration or refugees. And they're not wrong to do so. In fact, many of us do so. Unlike any other country, America is an idea. But it is not only an idea. America is also a real, particular place with real borders and real flesh and blood people living in it. And the Declaration tells us this was the case from the very beginning. Prior to those stirring passages that we all know about inalienable rights and nature's God, in the Declaration's very first sentence, the founders say it has become necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that tie them to another. One people, not all people, not citizens of the world, but actual, real people who made up actual colonies. And the founders frequently use the words we and us throughout the Declaration to describe that people. And on several occasions, the Declaration speaks of these colonies and these states. The founders were concerned about our circumstances in America. They owed a duty to their own people who had sent them as representatives to the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. They weren't trying to free South America from Spanish or Portuguese dominion, much as they might have condemned that dominion. And perhaps most notably, the founders explained towards the end of our Declaration that they had appealed not only to King George for redress, but also to their fellow British citizens. Yet those citizens had been, as the founders say, deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. Consanguinity, blood ties. It's pretty much the opposite of being a citizen of the world. So while the Declaration is, of course, a universal document, it is also a particular document. A document about one nation and one people. Its signers pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to each other in English, right here in America, not in Esperanto to all mankind in Brussels. Yet our cosmopolitan elites seem heedless of this distinction. They think because anyone can believe the same things as an American, that we are morally obligated to treat everyone like an American. Anything less, they say, is a betrayal of our ideals. But that's wrong. Just because you can become an American doesn't mean that you are an American. And it certainly doesn't mean we have to treat you as an American, especially if you don't play by our rules to begin with. After all, in our unique brand of nationalism, which connects our people through our ideas, repudiating our law is kind of like renouncing your blood ties in the monarchical lands of old. And what law is more central to a political community than who gets to become a citizen, under what conditions and when? While we wish our fellow man well, it's only our fellow citizens to whom we have a duty and whose rights our government was created to protect. And among the highest obligations we owe to each other is to ensure that every working American can lead a dignified life. If you look across our history, I'd argue that's always been the purpose of our immigration system, to create conditions in which normal, hardworking Americans can thrive. And you can look at the very beginning at what James Madison said as a representative on the floor of the House of Representatives in 1790, when the very first Congress was debating the very first naturalization law. Representative Madison said, "It is no doubt very desirable that we should hold out as many inducements as possible for the worthy part of mankind to come and settle amongst us and throw their fortunes in a common lot with ours." The worthy part, not the entire world. Madison continued, "But why is this desirable? Not merely to swell the catalog of people, no, sir. It is to increase the wealth and strength of the community." To increase the wealth and strength of the community. That's quite a contrast to today's elite consensus. Our immigration system should not serve the interests of foreigners or merely wealthy Americans. No, it ought to benefit all Americans and our common good. That's the purpose of immigration and the obligation of a statesman. The government, after all, is our creation. As self-governing citizens, we exercise our sovereignty by electing representatives to tend to our affairs, protect our interests, and preserve our liberty. And that's what we reasonably expect, that the men and women we elect will care for our common concerns. They should be farsighted and prudent. They should not put the interest of foreigners and foreign nations before ours or succumb to abstractions and intellectual fads. But today, we have too many elites who do just that, and not enough statesmen. Too many act like Mrs. Jellyby, obsessed with Boyo Bulaga and the well-beings of its residents, rather than what's best for their fellow citizens. This is foolhardy, as the recent immigration debates have shown, and it's dangerous as well. And that's because a self-governing citizenry expects its statesmen not only to put their interests first, but also to manage those affairs that we cannot handle individually. This is nowhere more true than the common defense of our democracy. Churchill struggled mightily in the 1930s to do just this, against the wishful thinking of others in the British government. He failed in part because of what another old Claremont fellow, the late Bill Rood, called the democratic strategic deficit. Democratic peoples have a dangerous inclination to believe that war is no longer possible. We organize our lives around compromise, negotiation, and consent. Violence is strictly controlled and aberrational in our societies. Commerce and other peaceful pursuits dominate our lives, so there's a natural tendency among democratic peoples to believe that these principles apply in international relations as well. But they don't. The world is a struggle for mastery and dominance of the international order, in which, as Bill Rood said, you run the show or the show runs you. Dictators organize their domestic order with force and violence and live in constant fear of their own lives and their grasp on power. So they understand this all too well. Because the United States dominates the world today, we need to understand these things and overcome the strategic deficit even more than most. What revisionist powers want to revise, after all, is the American role in the world. For all the tensions between great power rivals like Russia and China, or outlaw nations like North Korea and Iran, they can all agree on sticking it to the United States. Yet we're often slow to this realization. Against the risks of deterrence and the horrors of war, Americans are apt to conciliate an incremental aggressor. no less than any other democratic people. Unfortunately, this is not a strategic approach, nor does it yield strategic forecasts. Former Secretary of Defense Bob Gates testified to us on the Armed Services Committee a few years back. He said, "Our record since Vietnam in predicting where and how we will be militarily engaged next, even a few months out, is perfect. We have never once gotten it right." We never expected to be engaged militarily in Grenada, Lebanon, Libya, twice, Iraq, now 3 times, Afghanistan, the Balkans, Panama, Somalia, Haiti, and most recently West Africa to combat Ebola, to which we now must add Syria, too. America is a continental nation, full of riches and ingenious people and a fearsome military. We have a larger margin of error, therefore, than the small, weak, poor countries of Eurasia. But we cannot afford large strategic mistakes, or small ones indefinitely. The answer to the democratic strategic deficit is better, more strategic-minded statesmanship. It falls to all of us in the government, whether elected or appointed officials, to understand the world as it is, not as we might wish it to be, and to do what's necessary to protect our people against hostile powers bent on our destruction. It's what our citizens expect of us, and it's the fundamental reason they hire us in the first place. The good news is the strategic mindset has a long pedigree in American statecraft, so it's something to recover, not something to introduce. The father of our country, our first president, proclaimed it when he said, "To be prepared for war is one of the most effective means of preserving the peace." Not hoping for peace, not wishing for it, not entrusting it to other nations or international organizations. Washington knew none of those things preserve the peace. Only preparing for war does. And not only that, being prepared for war is also what allows the United States to defend the cause of justice. In his famous Melian dialogue, Thucydides recorded a perverted view of justice that is regrettably all too common across the ages. The strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must. But when the strong are also the just, then the weak have no need to fear them. Or as Bill Rood put it once, it is only the strong that can afford to be kind, and only the strong that can protect the weak. Only the strong can protect the weak. Perhaps that, in a nutshell, says what so many of our elites have forgotten in Washington. Only when our citizens are strong and flourishing can our country prosper. Only when our government has strength and energy to protect our citizens can we also be a beacon of hope to the world. And if he were here tonight, I suspect Sir Winston might agree. It's not for nothing, after all, that this man who loved his own country, Great Britain, so dearly, nevertheless declared that the great men who founded the American Constitution created a system of law and liberty under which they thrived and reached the physical and moral leadership of the world. It is the American statesman's duty to preserve that moral leadership, to protect our system of law and liberty on behalf of our fellow citizens. It's also the mission of the Claremont Institute, and I thank you for your devotion to the philosophical foundation of the American experiment in self-government. I'm humbled to receive your Statesmanship Award, and I'm honored to join you in that noble effort. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.